What does a young woman do when the math stops working? The system has no exceptions, and the last thing her dying father left her is an unfinished sentence in a worn leather notebook. She finds a piece of ground nobody wanted for $400, and she builds the answer herself. There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in parking lots after midnight. Not the silence of peace or rest, but the silence of things that have been left behind. Shopping carts drifting toward chain-link fences, streetlights humming over empty asphalt, the occasional semi rolling past on the highway without slowing down, without looking, without knowing that anything worth looking at exists on this exit at all. It was in that kind of silence that Maya Calloway spent the 14th night sleeping in a truck that did not belong to her. The truck belonged to her aunt, Carol Calloway, who had pressed the keys into Maya's palm 3 weeks earlier without ceremony, without a long goodbye, without the kind of speech people give when they believe things are going to get better. Carol had looked at her niece for a long moment, the kind of look that holds too many things to say out loud, and then she had said, quietly, "My mother gave me her hands when I needed them most. I'm giving you this truck. Don't let it be the last thing you ever take from someone who loves you." Then she had walked back inside, because Carol Calloway was not the kind of woman who watched people drive away. Maya had sat in the driveway for 3 full minutes before she turned the key. The truck was a 2004 Ford F-150, dark green, with a cracked passenger side mirror and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. It smelled like motor oil and old receipts. Maya was 23 years old. She had a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a phone with 9% battery, and a Ziploc bag containing $630 in cash, every dollar she had earned or saved in her entire adult life. On the floor of the passenger seat sat a canvas tool bag that had belonged to her father. And wedged between the seat and the center console, bent slightly at the spine from being carried everywhere for 8 months, was a notebook with a dark brown leather cover, worn soft at the corners, filled cover to cover in her father's handwriting. Every technique he had ever taught her, every measurement, every warning, every shortcut, and every reason why the shortcut would cost you later. She had read it so many times she could recite whole pages. But she had never been able to bring herself to read the last page all the way through because the last page ended mid-sentence in her father's hand, in a way that felt less like he had run out of time and more like he had left something for her to finish. The truck was parked behind a Family Dollar in Chapmanville, Logan County, West Virginia, at the edge of the lot where the asphalt gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way to weeds, and the weeds gave way to a darkness so complete it felt like the county itself had simply stopped trying. Nobody parked there. Nobody walked there. Nobody had any reason to look at the back edge of a Family Dollar parking lot in a county that the rest of America had quietly, efficiently, completely forgotten. Maya pulled her jacket tighter, watched her breath fog the window, and listened to the silence of a place that had been left behind, not knowing yet that she was about to refuse to leave with it. Logan County does not explain itself to outsiders. It does not ask to be understood or forgiven or saved. It simply exists. Ridge after ridge of Appalachian Mountain folding into the next. Hollows so deep that sunlight arrives late and leaves early. Towns built around a single industry, the way a body is built around a spine. And when that industry leaves, the body does not die all at once. It sways. It adjusts. It finds ways to keep standing that nobody planned for and nobody teaches in schools. Maya Calloway grew up in that kind of standing. Her grandfather had worked the coal mines for 31 years. Her father, Thomas Calloway, had followed him underground at 22, the way sons in Logan County followed fathers, the way water follows the path that already exists. Not because there were no other paths, but because this one was visible and the others were not. Thomas was not a simple man. He was specific and stubborn and deeply, quietly intelligent in the way that people become intelligent when they teach themselves from library books in the evenings after 12-hour shifts. He had taught himself to read engineering blueprints. He was the only man in his crew who could do it, and the mine supervisor had noticed. In 2008, when Maya was 7 years old, the supervisor had offered Thomas a management position, a desk, a salary increase, air conditioning, a title. The condition was simple. Thomas would need to stop supporting the workers during wage disputes. Thomas had looked at the offer for the length of a long breath and then said no. When Maya asked him years later why he had turned it down, he looked at her the way he always looked at her when he was about to say something he meant completely. "You measure a person by who they protect when nobody's watching," he said. not by who they impress when everybody is. The mine closed in 2014. Maya was 13. Her father drove 2 hours each way to construction work in Charleston. Her mother, June, worked the early shift at a gas station and the late shift cleaning rooms at a highway motel. June Calloway had hands that cracked every winter from the cleaning chemicals until her knuckles bled, and she wrapped them with medical tape each morning and went back because there was no version of not going back that kept the lights on. Maya found out years later, from her Aunt Carol, that her mother had been visited twice by a lawyer from Charleston who was building a class action lawsuit against the mine's safety practices. Both times, June had listened, asked careful questions, and then declined to sign. Not because she didn't believe the case, because signing meant losing the motel job, and losing the motel job meant Maya slept somewhere other than a bed. June Calloway protected her daughter the only way the math allowed her to, and she carried it forward, that particular weight of knowing what someone gave up quietly so you could have something they never said out loud. Thomas Calloway had 2 sons before Maya. Danny, the oldest, left for Ohio at 19 to work in a warehouse outside Columbus. He came back for Christmas twice and then stopped coming back. Not out of cruelty, but out of the specific exhaustion of someone who has worked very hard to build a life at a distance and cannot afford to keep looking back. Marcus, the middle child, went to Texas at 21 for oil field work, married a woman from Beaumont, and existed for Maya primarily as a voice on the phone at Thanksgiving who always said he was going to visit and never did. Thomas never said he was disappointed in his sons, but he spent his Saturdays with Maya. He had started teaching her construction the way men in Appalachia teach anything important, not in a classroom, not with a curriculum, but by handing her a tool and standing next to her while she figured out what it was for. She was 10 years old the first time he put a hammer in her hand and said, "Hold this right here while I show you." What he showed her that morning was how to drive a nail without splitting the wood, which sounds like a small thing until you understand that everything built by human hands begins with exactly that. By the time she was 12, she could frame a wall. By 14, she could hang a door level and replace a single-pane window without cracking the casing. By 16, she could rough wire a light switch, solder a copper pipe joint, and mix and pour a concrete footer that would sit below the frost line and hold through an Appalachian winter without heaving. None of it came from a class. All of it came from a father who could not afford to hire anyone to fix the things that broke and lived in a house where things broke constantly. But it was not Thomas alone who built what Maya knew. When she was 13, her father introduced her to Norma Jean Sykes, a 68-year-old woman who lived alone in a small house at the top of a gravel road outside Chapmanville and who had been, from 1982 to 2019, the only licensed electrical engineer in Logan County. Norma Jean had applied for a position at the coal company's electrical maintenance crew in 1987 and been told, politely and without legal consequence at the time, that the work was not suitable for women. She had spent 32 years proving, one permitted project at a time, how wrong that assessment was. She agreed to teach Maya for 3 summers. Wiring, circuits, conduit, load calculation, panel work. The exchange was simple and Norma Jean's idea. Maya would read to her each evening, large print library books, because Norma Jean's eyes had gotten bad enough that reading for more than 20 minutes gave her headaches. They sat on Norma Jean's porch in the early evenings, Maya reading aloud from whatever the library had sent that week, and Norma Jean teaching in the mornings with the kind of precise, unhurried instruction that comes from someone who has spent a lifetime being underestimated and decided the best response was to be undeniably excellent. Maya learned more about electrical work in those 3 summers than most licensed contractors know. She also learned, without it ever being said directly, that knowledge does not belong to the people who try to gatekeep it. It belongs to whoever is willing to sit on a porch every morning and learn. Thomas Calloway was diagnosed with lung cancer in the spring of 2023. The oncologist in Morgantown explained it clearly and without softening. 22 years of breathing coal dust in a mine that had never provided respirators, because respirators cost money, and the cost-benefit analysis had never been run with the miner's lungs as a variable worth protecting. Thomas listened to the diagnosis the way he listened to everything, without visible panic, with the particular stillness of a man who spent his life working in dangerous places and learned to assess what is actually in front of him rather than what he fears. He drove himself back to Chapmanville, stopped at the hardware store to pick up a tube of hydraulic cement he had meant to get the week before, and went home and made dinner. He did not tell Maya immediately. When he did tell her, 2 weeks later, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee going cold between them, his first sentence was not about himself. It was about her. "You know enough now," he said. "I want you to understand that. Whatever happens, you know enough." He died in January of 2024 in a hospital bed in Middlesbrough, with Maya sitting in the chair beside him and the cardiac monitor making its small, indifferent sounds. He had been mostly unconscious for 18 hours. Near the end of that time, he opened his eyes, looked at Maya with complete clarity, and said, "That notebook, the last page, I didn't finish it because I didn't know the ending yet. I know it now, but you have to find it yourself." Then he closed his eyes. 4 hours later, the monitor changed its sound. Maya sat in the chair for a long time after the nurses came and went. She was not numb. That is the word people use, because the actual feeling does not have a clean name. It is the sensation of something vast and load-bearing being removed from the structure of your daily life, and the strange, terrible surprise of finding that you are still standing, that the roof has not yet come down. She drove home in the dark on roads she had driven 10,000 times and did not once think about where she was going because her hands knew. The morning after the funeral, her two brothers called within an hour of each other. Danny called first. His voice was careful in the way voices get careful when they are building towards something uncomfortable. He asked about the house, about whether their father had left anything, about what Maya was planning to do. When she told him there was nothing, no savings, no property, no estate, he was quiet for a moment, and then said, "You should probably think about leaving, Maya. There's nothing holding you there now." She hung up. She sat in the kitchen of a house she would not be able to afford in 60 days and looked at the hydraulic cement her father had set on the counter before he got sick, still in its packaging, and understood something she would not be able to put into words for a long time. That staying was not the absence of a choice. Staying was the choice. Every young person in rural Appalachia eventually sits down and does the math. It is not a complicated calculation. It does not require algebra or financial literacy or any special knowledge beyond the ability to subtract one number from another and read what remains. Maya had done this math in various forms since she was 17, and the answer was always the same, expressed in different amounts and slightly different line items, but arriving always at the same fundamental truth. The numbers did not work. They had never worked. And the system that produced those numbers had not been designed to work for people like her in places like this. She was making $9.75 an hour at a building supply store in Logan 3 days a week. After taxes, roughly $250 a week. The cheapest apartment in Chapmanville was listed at $595 a month, a 2-room unit with water damage visible in the listing photos, and a landlord who had stopped returning maintenance calls sometime around 2021. Utilities, food, phone, gas for the truck she did not own. The math did not work. But before the math had become survival, it had first been humiliation. When Maya was 21, she received a letter from West Virginia University informing her that she had been selected for a construction technology scholarship, $8,000 per year, renewable for 4 years beginning that fall. The letter arrived 3 months after the application deadline had passed. The scholarship committee had sent the notification to the email address on file, an address Maya had created at 17, using a library computer, and had not been able to access in over a year because the account required a recovery phone number she no longer had, the number belonging to a prepaid phone she had stopped paying for. When the money ran out, Andy, the committee's follow-up letter, had gone to a zip code with 2 transposed numbers, a county records error she had never known to correct. She drove to Morgantown. She sat across from a woman in the admissions office who had the specific kind of practice sympathy that institutions develop when they want to appear caring without altering any of their actual procedures. Maya explained what had happened. She brought documentation. The woman listened fully and then said, with a regret that Maya believed was real, "I understand, but the system doesn't have a mechanism for exceptions at this stage." Maya drove back to Logan County in silence. She stopped once at a gas station outside of Madison and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes with the engine running. She was not crying. She was doing what she had learned to do in situations where anger was accurate but useless. She was converting it. She was taking the fact of a door that did not open and asking herself what you build when the architecture does not include a door for you. The answer, she was beginning to understand, was that you do not wait for someone to add one. You learn where the walls are thinnest and you put your own door there. And then you make sure you tell everyone else exactly where you put it. It was not Carol who told her about the land. It was Maya herself who found it. Alone, in the cab of the truck, over 4 consecutive nights, reading a document that almost no one in Logan County had ever read in its entirety, because almost no one believed it contained anything that belonged to them. The document was the county's annual list of tax delinquent properties. 847 pages of legal descriptions, parcel numbers, assessed values, and years of unpaid tax. All of it public record, all of it available at the county clerk's office in printed form for a $3 copying fee, all of it representing land that the county had effectively given up on and was quietly hoping someone would take off its hands before the carrying costs compounded further. Maya had learned the document existed from a single sentence in a newspaper article about a land reclamation project in McDowell County. The sentence mentioned that tax delinquent property lists were public record in all West Virginia counties. She had driven to the clerk's office the next morning, paid her $3, and driven back to the Family Dollar parking lot with 847 pages of small print legal text. She read it with a flashlight and a yellow highlighter, working methodically from page 1. She was looking for something specific. A small parcel, flat enough to build on, in a location with access to a road, delinquent long enough that the back taxes would be within reach of her Ziploc bag. She found it on page 394. A quarter-acre lot outside Chapmanville, on a back road above a creek, 6 years delinquent, assessed at $2,100, back taxes owed $400. She drove out to look at it the next morning at first light. The road was gravel and steep on one side. A stand of tulip poplars blocked the view from the road entirely. The creek ran along the lower edge of the property with the steady sound of water that has found its course. There was one level section, roughly 12 by 16 feet, at the center of the lot where someone had once cleared the brush and the ground had stayed open. She stood in that clearing for a long time, looking at the tree line, listening to the water. Then she drove to the county clerk's office. The woman behind the desk was Ruth Ann Boggs, 54 years old, with reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair and the composed, unflappable manner of someone who has processed 20 years of other people's crises without losing her place in line. Maya explained what she wanted. She placed the Ziploc bag on the counter and counted out $400 in cash. Ruth Ann looked at the money, then at Maya, then at the property number. Maya had written on a piece of notebook paper. She was quiet for a moment. That was just long enough to mean something. Then she said, in a voice low enough that it was only for the two of them, "I know that parcel. 4 years ago I wanted to buy it myself. Didn't have $400 at the time." She picked up the stamp. She brought it down on the deed transfer form with the clean authority of someone who has been waiting a long time to do exactly that. Then she stood up, reached across the counter, and shook Maya's hand. Maya walked out of the Logan County Clerk's office holding a piece of paper that said she owned land. She was 23 years old. She had $230 left, and she was going to build something on that land that nobody could take back. She started clearing on a Monday in early March, when the ground was still cold enough to be firm, but the worst of the ice had pulled back from the creek banks. She worked alone, with a mattock and a handsaw, clearing the brush from the level section and stacking the cut wood at the edge of the property for fuel. On the days she was not clearing or building, she drove down to the building supply store in Logan and worked her 3 shifts, because the $230 she had left after buying the land was not enough alone, and she had known that before she ever stamped the deed. The tulip poplars did not need to be touched. They stood at the perimeter like a decision someone else had made on her behalf a long time ago, and she was grateful for them. She dug the 4-footer holes by hand with a post-hole digger, 18 inches deep, below the frost line, because her father had told her at 13 that a footer poured above the frost line is not a footer, it is a suggestion. The concrete mix cost $50 for enough bags to fill 4 holes. She mixed it in a plastic tub with water from the creek and a garden hose she had taken from her aunt's garage. While the footers cured, she found the lumber. A call to Dennis Prater, the Logan County property manager, led her to a building she had not thought about in years. The old Chapmanville Elementary Annex, a wooden structure built in 1954 that had been closed in 2018 when enrollment in the district dropped below the federal threshold for continued funding. The county had been paying a demolition company to clear the site the following month. Prater was a compact, quiet man in his late 50s who had spent 3 decades watching things in Logan County disappear and had developed a manner that was neither bitter nor optimistic about it, simply accurate. He looked at Maya across his desk for a long moment when she asked about the lumber. Then he said, I'll give you 1 week before the machine goes in. Take what you can move. She made 9 trips in her aunt's truck over 6 days. The wood was old-growth oak and poplar, dense, straight-grained, the kind of timber that hasn't been commercially logged in 50 years because the forests it came from were cleared out before most of the people in Logan County were born. On one of the boards, near what had been the base of a classroom wall, she found writing in chalk, faded but legible in the right light. "I will be good." She set that board in the truck bed carefully, on top of everything else, face up. She did not plan to build with it. The framing took 9 days. 12 feet by 16. Shed roof pitched at 4 and 12 for rain runoff. 1 door, 3 windows she bought for $20 from a salvage operation outside of Man. The corners were square and the headers were doubled, and every joint was driven with the specific confidence of someone who has been taught not to rush the work that nobody ever sees. Then came the problem she had not anticipated. The soil near the creek was holding more moisture than the surface suggested. Not enough to make the site unbuildable, but enough that without intervention, the footers would be fighting groundwater migration through the frost seasons for years. Her father's notebook had no entry for this exact condition. She sat with the problem for 2 days before she called Norma Jean. Norma Jean was 78 now and did not move easily, but her mind was the same instrument it had always been. Precise, patient, and entirely unimpressed by problems that had solutions. She listened to Maya's description over the phone for 20 minutes, asking 3 clarifying questions, and then told her exactly what to do. A polyethylene moisture barrier, black, laid at a 5-degree angle away from the foundation, buried 12 inches down, redirecting groundwater laterally before it reached the footers. Maya dug the trench by hand the next morning. It took 4 hours. The barrier cost $25. The problem was solved. She had not counted the gas for the 9 trips to the school or the runs to Man and Stolings in Charleston because the truck was her aunt's, and the debt she owed Carol Calloway was not a thing she intended to settle in dollars. Total cost of the finished structure: land, concrete, windows, moisture barrier, tar paper and roofing compound for $15, wood stove purchased used for $90 from a man in Stolings who was upgrading to a larger model, double wall stovepipe for $40, a single used 100-watt solar panel for $60, a carbon monoxide detector purchased new for $22. Because it was the one thing she would not buy used, a composting toilet built from a 5-gallon bucket and a $3 seat from the Habitat Restore in Charleston came to $725. Everything else came from a condemned school, a salvage yard, and a creek. Maya had not asked anyone for anything. This was partly pride and partly logistics. She did not have a precise list of what she needed, and there is a particular discomfort in asking for help when you cannot describe the shape of the help you need. But Logan County has its own communication system, slower than the internet and more accurate, built from decades of people watching other people and understanding without being told when watching is no longer sufficient. Ruth Ann Boggs brought a quilt the second week of March. Not a new one. A heavy, double-sided cotton quilt that had belonged to her mother, folded inside a plastic bin with a lid, left on the front step of the unfinished structure one morning before Maya arrived. There was no note. Ruth Ann did not mention it when Maya came into the clerk's office 3 days later for a zoning question. Maya mentioned it. Ruth Ann adjusted her glasses and said, "Winters up there are cold. My mother would have wanted it used." Dennis Prater left a hardware store bag on the step a week after that. Not a dramatic delivery. Not a thing he knocked on the door for. A bag set down and a truck driven away. Inside, 3 boxes of exterior wood screws, a tube of silicone sealant, and a package of roofing nails. No receipt, no note. Maya found it when she arrived in the morning and stood looking at it for a moment before she picked it up because she recognized the specific language of the gesture. Help offered without the obligation of gratitude, which is the rarest and most generous form of help there is. The mattress arrived in the 3rd week. Maya came back from the building supply store one evening to find a twin mattress leaning against the door frame, not new, but clean, covered in a plastic sleeve. Clearly someone's second best thing given freely. She did not know who had left it. She asked around. Nobody claimed it. 3 months later, she learned the truth from Norma Jean, who mentioned it in passing. The way people mention things they are proud of, but do not want to make a performance of. Her husband, Carl Sykes, 73 years old, a man Maya had met twice and exchanged perhaps 30 words with, had driven up the gravel road alone one afternoon with the mattress in the bed of his pickup, carried it to the door by himself, and driven back down. He had not told Norma Jean he was going. She found out because he came home with mud on his boots and she asked. When Maya went to thank him, Carl looked at her with the uncomplicated directness of a man who has lived long enough to say exactly what he means and no more. Don't thank me, he said. Just remember somebody did this for you. And when you can, do it for someone else. Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. She understood that he was not giving her a piece of advice. He was handing her an instruction that would take years to fully execute. The house was finished on a Tuesday in late April, 6 weeks and 2 days after she had broken ground. She knew it was finished not because she had checked every item on a list. She had no list, had never worked from a list, but because she walked through the door that evening, and the structure did not feel like a project anymore. It felt like a place. She had a wood stove with a carbon monoxide detector mounted directly above her sleeping area, which she tested with the button on the side before she lit the first fire, because the mountains are full of men who trusted the stove and not the detector, and were not alive to explain the difference. She had 2 LED strips powered by the solar panel. She had water filtered from the creek through a charcoal and sand system into a basin that served as her sink, and she boiled it before drinking because Norma Jean had told her the first summer they worked together that a filter removes what you can see and boiling removes what you cannot. She had a composting toilet and a charged phone and a small battery-powered radio that picked up 3 stations, 2 of which played country music and 1 of which played classic rock. And on a given night, she could choose between them based on whether she needed comfort or momentum. She ate a bowl of soup she had heated on the stove and sat on the edge of the mattress Carl Sykes had carried up the hill alone, and she looked at the wall she had built with her own hands from wood that children had learned their alphabet beside, and she felt something that took her a long time to name. Not happiness, exactly. Not relief, though relief was present. It was closer to the feeling of a load-bearing structure finally taking its own weight, the specific stillness of something that has been straining under pressure and has now found its equilibrium. She reached into the canvas tool bag and took out the leather notebook. She had not opened it since the hospital. She turned to the last page by feel. The way you find a page you have visited so many times the paper knows to open there. Her father's handwriting in his careful, self-taught engineer's print. A house is not finished when the last nail goes in. A house is finished when, and then nothing. The line ended with a dash and the remaining 2/3 of the page were blank. She sat with that for a long time. The wood stove ticked as the metal expanded with heat. The creek moved over its stones outside, with the steady, indifferent patience of water that has been doing exactly this since before anyone built anything nearby. The tulip poplars shifted in the wind above the roof, and the whole structure settled, almost imperceptibly, around her. The sound of a frame finding its final position, the way her father had told her a frame always does if you've built it right. You give it time, he had said, and it finds where it wants to be. She picked up a pen. She wrote beneath her father's dash in her own hand, smaller than his but steadier. When someone inside it is no longer afraid. She closed the notebook. She lay back on the mattress and looked at the ceiling she had sheathed herself, at the ridge beam she had set with a level she had borrowed from Norma Jean and returned the same day. And she did not sleep for a long time, not because she was uncomfortable, but because she was listening to the house. And the house had things to say. In the morning, the light came through the east-facing window at an angle she had not calculated, but that arrived anyway, the way good things sometimes do, and fell across the classroom board she had propped against the interior wall, the board with the chalk writing she had carried carefully on top of all the other lumber. In that light, at that angle, she saw for the first time what she had not seen before. Below the faded "I will be good," in slightly smaller letters that had always been hidden in the flat light of dusk, another child's hand had written, "I will be brave." 2 sentences. 2 children. 1 board from a school that no longer existed, carrying both of them forward into a house that did. 6 months after she moved into the house, on the back road above the creek, Maya sat at the small work table she had built from leftover oak and wrote a document that Norma Jean had been asking her to write since April. Not a blog, not a social media post. A technical document, 40 pages, handwritten first and then typed at the public library on a computer that required a library card and 15 cents per printed page. The document described, in precise and sequential order, every decision she had made during the construction of her house. Why she chose a shed roof over a gable, how she calculated the footer depth for the soil conditions on her parcel, where to find tax-delinquent property lists, and how to read them, what questions to ask at the county clerk's office, how to assess salvage lumber for structural integrity, how to build a moisture barrier on a budget of $25. It was written for a specific reader, someone who did not have a father who taught them, did not have a Norma Jean Sykes in their life, did not know that any of this was possible, but who was sleeping in a truck behind a gas station somewhere in West Virginia and doing the math that never added up and looking for a door that the architecture had not included. Norma Jean had said, when she suggested it, "This isn't for you, Maya. You already know it. This is for the next person who doesn't have anyone to ask." Maya printed 12 copies at the library for $1.80 each. She left them in a stack at the reference desk with a handwritten note. Free. Take one. The stack was gone in 6 weeks. The librarian called her and asked if she had more. She didn't. But Ruth Ann Boggs had read one. Ruth Ann brought the document to the Logan County Commission's next regular meeting and placed it on the table in front of the 5 commissioners with the calm authority of a woman who has processed enough paperwork to know exactly when paperwork matters. She made one request, that the county publish its tax-delinquent property list in a searchable, human-readable format on the county website, updated annually, rather than maintaining it exclusively as an 847-page printed document available only at the clerk's office for a $3 fee that most people did not know they could pay. The motion passed 3-2. In the 12 months that followed, 7 people in Logan County purchased tax-delinquent land for less than $600. 3 of them had been living in conditions that could not be described as housing. When a reporter from the Charleston Gazette-Mail drove up the gravel road to interview Maya in the fall, Maya did not talk about the house for the first 20 minutes. She talked about her father teaching her to drive a nail without splitting the wood. She talked about Norma Jean Sykes, who had been told in 1987 that engineering was not for women, and had spent the next 32 years proving otherwise. She talked about Ruth Ann Boggs, who had wanted to buy a piece of ground for 20 years and had finally helped someone else do it instead. She talked about Carl Sykes carrying a mattress up a hill for a young woman he barely knew and asking nothing in return except that the gesture be passed forward. Then she opened the leather notebook to the last page and showed the reporter both sets of handwriting, her father's unfinished sentence, and the ending she had written herself, and she said, "He told me the ending existed, but I had to find it. I thought he meant the sentence, but I think now he meant all of it." Ruth Ann, Norma Jean, Carl, the library, the 7 families, the website. I think the house wasn't finished when I drove the last nail. I think it's still being finished. She paused. Outside, the creek moved over its stones. The tulip poplars were turning gold at the edges in the October light. Logan County didn't lose its will, she said. It lost its information. It lost its belief that the information belonged to it. That's the thing I want people to understand. Not that I built a house for $725, but that there is a list in every county clerk's office in this country with land on it that belongs to whoever is willing to go read it. The system counts on people not knowing that. The system counts on people believing that the door doesn't exist. She closed the notebook. "The door exists," she said. "I put one in myself, and I wrote down exactly where. If this story changed the way you see the land nobody wants and the people nobody counts, subscribe and leave a comment below telling me which part stayed with you the longest and where in the world you are watching this from."
Maya Calloway was 23, sleeping in a price truck with $630 and a real father unfinished statement. Citizens wait for rescue. Series 847B public records by floodline. She found water forested land for $400. She built a house with her own hand from a condiment school lumber. A cracked water and everything her father ever taught her. The most powerful lesson isn't about construction, it's about information. The system doesn't fry people by looking tall. It fries them by convincing them the door don't exist. That tax delinquent property list public record available to anyone for $3. But nobody told the people who needs emote because the system count on the silent man didn't just build a house, silver down every step, please tell copy. Let them free at the library 7 families found land within a year. 3 of them had no home before. One woman knowledge flee right, different change of county. This is what education truly means. Not a classroom, not a credit, but the radical act of saying, I found the door here exactly where I put it. Now go have someone else find it. Notice has died. Notice there will community.